Hi, everyone. My name is Shana Weinberg. I'm the Assistant Director of the Center for the Study of Slavery and Justice. I'm pleased to welcome and introduce our final keynote presentation for the afternoon after 2 days of really powerful and remarkable conversations. I do also want to let you all know that there'll be a hot reception at the CSSJ following this keynote presentation, so I hope that you'll stick with us and we'll bring people over to the CSSJ right after. This presentation will take us to Brazil, examining the legacies of slavery and how contemporary politics intersect with race in Brazil today. We're really honored to have with us today politician, scholar, and activist Dr. Silvio Humberto Cunha. Dr. Silvio is a longtime activist in Afro-Brazilian social movements. He is the honorary president of the Steve Biko Cultural Institute. Dr. Silvio has experience on a range of issues, including economics, economic development, public policy, affirmative action, race relations, international relations focusing on Brazil-Africa relations, and is a member of the Race and Democracy in the Americas group. A professor of the State University Feira de Santana, he holds a doctorate in economics from the State University of Campinas, São Paulo. He is now serving his second term as council member for the city of Salvador, capital of Bahia State. Joining Dr. Silvio is Professor Jiri Augusto, who will provide interpretation and moderation support. And for the transcriptionists, we would ask that you follow Professor Augusto's talk. Professor Jiri is the Girard Visiting Associate Professor of International and Public Affairs and Africana Studies at Brown University, Interim Director of Development Studies, and a Watson Institute Faculty Fellow. She is interested in epistemologies of practice, subjugated knowledges, histories of science and technology, and radical Black transnationalism. She is a frequent collaborator with the Steve Biko Cultural Institute. An artist as well as a scholar, Professor Jiri's assemblage Plants of Bondage, Liberation Flora, depicting the botanical knowledge of enslaved people, is on permanent display at the CSSJ, and we hope you'll take a look at it after this talk. I hope that you can join me in welcoming Dr. Silvio.
Ok. Boa tarde.
Good afternoon.
I speak. Vai, eu falar em inglês. Eu vou falar em português, porque eu fico mais confortável.
Because I'll be more comfortable doing that.
Queria começar agradecendo ao convite do Centro de Estudos de Escravidão e Justiça.
I wanted to start by thanking the Center for the Study of Slavery and
Em especial o
Justice,
professor Anthony.
and especially Professor Anthony Wilkes.
E com mais, assim, com muita satisfação e alegria, a professora Jiri Augusto, que é mais do que uma parceira, é uma amiga dessa vida e das outras que nós não sabemos.
And I have a lot of satisfaction also in thanking you for the presence of Dr. Jiri Augusto, who is our friend, our colleague, and a lot of other things, a lot of other work.
Vou fazer hoje à tarde uma conversa, até pegando a última imagem, né, que apareceu, que foi demonstrada, que é Vidas Negras Importam, em português.
I'm going to try to conduct a conversation here, and we're going to pass through many things, but I want to pick up from where at the last presentation, the last image that was shown, it was written Vidas Negras Importam-se, which means Black Lives Matter in Portuguese.
Então, eu observei recente lá em Salvador, teve um debate sobre a coalizão negra.
Recently I participated in a debate in the city of São Paulo about black coalitions.
Ativista da África do Sul, né?
It was an activist from South Africa.
Inclusive do movimento, né, Vidas Negras Importam.
In fact, it was a South African member of their Black Lives Matter movement.
Ela disse uma frase que para mim marcou bastante.
She said something that really impressed me.
Ela disse que não foi o que nós não fizemos, e sim o que fizemos que está relevando uma reação conservadora em todo o mundo.
Repeat that.
Não foi o que nós não fizemos, e sim o que fizemos que está levando essa reação conservadora em todo o mundo.
She said it isn't what we didn't do, but it is what we are doing that has led to this conservative reaction all over the world.
Que às vezes nós nos perguntamos, né, principalmente no Brasil agora, o que foi que nós não fizemos?
Sometimes we ask ourselves in Brazil, what is it that we didn't do?
Mas na verdade foi o que nós acertamos.
But in fact, it is actually what we did manage to do.
Então eu vou começar trazendo um slide aqui
So I'm going to start with a slide here
para que vocês entendam bem o que é o Brasil.
so that you can understand better what is Brazil.
Né? Nós temos uma população de mais de 220 milhões de pessoas.
We have a population of more than 220 million persons.
Na verdade, nós somos um continente na América.
In fact, we are of continental extension inside South America.
São mais de 8 milhões de quilômetros de metros quadrados,
More than 8 million square kilometers,
27 estados
27 states,
e mais de 5 mil municípios.
and more than 5,000 municipalities.
Então, quando nós estamos falando dos navios negreiros até a Vidas Negras importam, dá para entender que o Brasil tem mais tempo dentro da escravidão do que fora dela.
So if we understand what it means to say from the slave ship to Black Lives Matter, we understand that Brazil actually has spent more time under slavery than outside of slavery.
Até chegar a esse marco de 1888,
Until we get to 1888,
foram muitas lutas, muitas revoltas.
there were so many struggles and so many revolts.
Eu destacaria a de 1798,
I just want to highlight some, such as the one of 1998.
e 98.
1990?
1798, desculpe.
Okay. Of 1798, for example,
Que foi a revolta dos Búzios,
which was the Cowrie Shell Revolt,
onde nós lutamos por liberdade, igualdade e fraternidade
where we struggled for freedom, liberty, and equality,
e por uma república,
and for a republic.
em pleno domínio da colonização portuguesa.
In the middle of the full-blown Portuguese colonization of
E
the time.
interessante que ela foi extremamente reprimida, duramente reprimida,
This rebellion was extremely hard, underwent an extremely hard repression,
onde as pessoas tiveram seus corpos esquartejados
where people who participated were quartered,
e no centro da cidade tiveram seus corpos expostos,
and then those quarters of their bodies were left exposed in the center of the city.
mas eliminaram fisicamente, mas os ideais chegaram até os nossos dias.
That was a physical elimination, but the ideas from that period have
E o
endured till
movimento
today.
negro conseguiu colocá-los como heróis da pátria.
And finally, the black movement in Brazil has managed to put them on the national stage as heroes of the country.
Então, isso para demonstrar essa resistência, né?
This is just to demonstrate the
Porque
resistance.
quando chega em 1888, que ocorre a libertação, a abolição formal,
So when in 1888 formal abolition arrives in
toda
Brazil,
essa luta, né,
that entire struggle
posteriormente se construiu um discurso que foi a princesa Isabel que libertou a população escrava.
what happened after 1888 and the formal declaration of abolition is that a whole new narrative was created which said that Princess Isabella of the Portuguese kingdom
Esvaziando todo esse passado de luta.
granted freedom to the slaves, and this just bypassed an entire tradition of several hundred years of struggle
E a
against slavery.
partir daí se criou, né, a ideia de que o Brasil é um paraíso racial,
And that's when it began to create this myth that Brazil was a racial paradise.
né, que problema com racismo é nos Estados Unidos.
And that the problem of racism was something that happened in the United
No
States.
Brasil, não.
In Brazil, no.
E quando você vai para os números, né, quando você vai para a realidade propriamente dita, isso não passou de um sonho de uma noite, nem de verão.
But if you look at the actual numbers, if you look at the actual reality, this doesn't even pass as anything more than a bad dream.
Mas é importante dizer que o problema não foi assim. A escravidão é um problema, mas a situação da população negra, hoje no Brasil, que eu vou apresentar alguns dados, do tamanho dessa desigualdade, não se pode atribuir tão assim essencialmente à escravidão.
So when we look at the whole legacy of slavery in Brazil, I'm going to present some data to you that shows that the inequality, the high degree of inequality, racial inequality in Brazil today cannot be attributed only to the fact that we had a slave regime.
Porque a escravidão terminou em 1888.
Because that slave regime ended in 1888.
São 131 anos,
So that's 130 more years,
com tempo suficiente para, de fato, você ter igualdade de oportunidades.
which should have been time enough to create equality of opportunity.
Mas isso não aconteceu.
But that did not happen.
Então, não é escravidão, porque quando a escravidão termina, as relações raciais não desaparecem.
So we can't blame it only on slavery, because when slavery ends formally, the racial regime does not end.
Algo-
Racial discrimination does not end.
Uma outra instituição precisa regular essas relações raciais.
Something else is regulating these social relations to make them unequal.
E no Brasil, o que vai regular é o mito da democracia racial.
And what is used in Brazil to regulate these social relations is something called the myth of racial democracy,
Onde você mantém as hierarquias raciais
where the hierarchies based on race are maintained.
e, consequentemente, você mantém as hierarquias sociais.
So therefore, the social hierarchies are maintained.
Então, aqui, nós temos alguns dos números
So
dessa
here are
desigualdade.
some numbers about the inequality in Brazil.
Você pode observar que em todo lugar, em todos os 27 estados do Brasil,
In all 27 Brazilian states,
a diferença em termos de rendimento entre negros e brancos
you can see the difference in income between blacks
faz
and
presente.
whites. And that kind of inequality of income is present in all 27 states.
nós temos uma escadinha, que poderia chamar assim. O homem branco, a mulher branca, o homem negro e a mulher negra. Na
So-
base da pirâmide está essa mulher negra.
So we have a social pyramid, and you could say that it's constructed at the top is the white man, then is the white woman, then is the black man, and finally at the base of the pyramid is the black woman.
Qualquer área que você escolher, a desigualdade racial está presente.
It doesn't matter which area of social life you choose to look at, inequality, racial inequality will
Você
be
tem um
present.
dado aqui sobre escolaridade.
So, for example, there's the chart here about schooling, formal schooling.
Você vê que tem um aumento do número de pessoas negras, né? Aumenta a escolaridade das pessoas negras,
So you can see that the level of schooling or numbers of black people with formal schooling is rising.
mas a distância entre negros e brancos permanece.
But the distance between whites who finish school and blacks who finish school
Nós temos aí pelo menos
maintains that distance.
10 anos das ações afirmativas nas universidades.
We've been waging 10 years now of affirmative action in Brazilian universities.
Nós aumentamos a presença das pessoas negras nas universidades públicas,
So we managed to increase the number of black people in the public universities.
mas, por exemplo, no meu estado, que é a Bahia, um lugar com 14 milhões de pessoas,
But for example, in my home state, which is the state of Bahia with 14 million people,
é o segundo pior desempenho de pessoas adultas com um nível superior.
it ranks second lowest in the country in terms of black people with higher level education or with university education.
Apenas de cada 10, em cada 10, um tem um nível superior.
In every 10 persons, only one would have university education.
Um outro estado que é pior do que a Bahia
And there's another state that's worse than Bahia,
é o Maranhão.
which is Maranhão,
Fica mais ou menos aqui assim, esse estado aqui.
towards the northeast there.
Um estado de maioria negra também.
Another state which has a clear black majority.
Um outro dado
Another set of data
é entender que o Brasil não é um país pobre.
to understand that Brazil is actually not a poor country.
O Brasil é um país extremamente desigual.
What it is an extremely unequal country.
Eu gosto muito de futebol,
I like football a lot.
então nós dizemos, aliás eu digo isso, que o Brasil não perde uma final da Copa do Mundo das desigualdades.
That Brazil never loses never loses taking first place in any World Cup of inequality.
Sempre que tem a possibilidade, vai fazer a final.
Every time it gets a chance to make it to the finals, it makes it to the finals.
Né? E essa desigualdade não é uma desigualdade, até um determinado momento se colocava uma desigualdade social.
Up to a certain point, that was always interpreted as a social
Homogênea.
inequality, a homogeneous type of social
Como se não
inequality.
tivesse cor, gênero e região.
as if this were an inequality that did not have color, region, and gender.
A pobreza no Brasil tem cor,
Poverty in Brazil does have color,
gênero
does have a gender,
e região.
and it does have a region.
Atinge as pessoas negras,
It reaches into the lives of
as
black people
mulheres
and women,
e na região norte e nordeste.
and in the northern and northeastern
E
parts of Brazil,
também a juventude.
and also into youth, the
E
youth population.
é importante destacar que essa foi uma luta do movimento negro para reconhecer a cor da pobreza.
And it is by means of the black struggle that we began to make it clear what
Porque
was the color of poverty in Brazil.
Até então, os economistas, aqueles que discutem desenvolvimento econômico, os que discutem desenvolvimento econômico consideravam que o problema do Brasil era só do subdesenvolvimento do Brasil uma questão exclusivamente de classe.
Because up until a certain point, the mainstream economists, the ones who analyze and interpret economic development, insisted that it was a question of Brazil being underdeveloped and that was a question only of class.
O racismo não estruturava as relações de poder e não estruturava as relações sociais.
Under that interpretation, racism did not construct or structure the inequality or structure the society.
Estavam convencidos de que racismo era o modelo dos Estados Unidos.
They were convinced or managed to convince people that racism was a model for the United States.
Então, as pessoas negras eram relevantes até 1888.
And so black people were relevant until 1888.
Depois disso, todos, de forma acrítica, viraram trabalhadores nacionais.
And after that, they all became national workers in the national discourse.
É interessante que nos estudos econômicos,
What's interesting is that there are economic studies,
muitos trabalhos sobre os imigrantes.
a lot of economic studies about immigrants to Brazil.
E a ideia de que os imigrantes vieram para o Brasil tão somente para suprir a falta de braços.
And that the idea was that these immigrants were brought to Brazil just to deal with the lack of labor power, lack of labor.
Foi justamente a discussão das ruas do próprio movimento negro que levou a demonstrar que a imigração para o Brasil ela não tinha um caráter de suprir os braços, e sim de embranquecer a população brasileira.
And it was the black movement which introduced a different analysis, which said that the immigration of people from Europe to Brazil was not because there was a shortage of labor. It was a deliberate policy to whiten Brazil.
Então, isso mudou a chave de se entender a desigualdade no Brasil.
So this opened up the key to the door to understanding really inequality in Brazil.
Então, nós continuamos ainda buscando, enfrentando esse problema,
We still face and continue to face this problem.
mas hoje é inevitável, você não pode falar que vivemos uma democracia racial no Brasil.
But inevitably today you can no longer say that we live in a racial democracy in Brazil.
Então, esses números que aqui estão nesse slide aqui,
So the numbers on this slide
dá uma ideia do tamanho da desigualdade brasileira.
are demonstrative of the level or the range of inequality
Eu
in
vou
Brazil.
citar apenas dois,
I'll just cite two.
onde tem o número 6 ali,
The number 6 here
que diz que 6 pessoas no Brasil concentram uma renda equivalente a 50% da população brasileira.
it says that 6 Brazilians could, managed to concentrate the riches or the wealth of 100 million people in Brazil. In other words, there are 6 Brazilians who have as much money as 100 million other Brazilians.
São cerca de 6 igual a 100 milhões de pessoas. Em 2089,
Up to, by the time of 2089,
se tivessem sido mantidas as políticas de promoção da igualdade racial, né, a igualdade racial seria alcançada no Brasil em 2089.
if Brazil had continued or were to continue with affirmative action measures, it would only be by the year 2089 that Brazilian women would come to the same salary level as Brazilian men.
Ou seja, havia uma possibilidade de que aquelas retas de duas retas paralelas se encontrarem, né? E agora elas voltam a se encontrar no infinito.
So once there was a possibility that these two separate parallel tracks or paths would eventually meet, but now it seems like they're going along separately into infinity.
Então, com esse atual governo que nós estamos,
With the current government,
que tem como lema a desconstrução nacional,
which has as its motto national deconstruction,
que a cada ato diminui o tamanho do país,
to reduce the size of the country.
E se nós não tem como você comparar o que foram os 10, 15 anos do governo Lula e Dilma,
If we didn't have something to compare it by, which was the 10 to 15 years under the Lula government,
o atual presidente do país é alguém que tem como lema a palavra desconstrução. E okay.
so if you were to compare those two positions, the 10 to 15 years under the Lula administration and what was achieved, with the motto or the slogan of the current president, which is deconstruct the nation.
Então, o alvo dele poderia resumir são todas as conquistas sociais.
What we could say is that his target is to attack or destroy all of the social gains of recent years.
Todos os elementos que têm a ver com a democracia participativa.
Everything that has to do with participative democracy.
E ele não está sozinho, ele está junto com outros que foi eleito com uma pauta não econômica.
He's not alone. He was elected along with several others who have that same platform. It's not an economic platform.
Uma pauta com base na família.
It's called a platform on the basis of the family.
Qualquer semelhança, às vezes, é mera coincidência.
Any similarity to events and slogans and actions here is merely coincidental.
Então, é a defesa dos valores genuínos nacionais,
So this is about defending genuine national values,
de um nacionalismo,
about nationalism of a certain type,
do homem,
about men,
do lugar da mulher,
about the place or the role of women,
e de que a minha cor é a cor do Brasil.
and that my color is the color of Brazil.
Inclusive, o deputado, acho que um dos deputados mais votados, com cerca de 350 mil votos, foi um deputado negro.
In fact, one of the deputies that got the most number of votes, 50,000, was a black representative, state House representative,
Anti-movimento negro.
who is anti or against the black movement. And
Que
he's the one
aparece-
that won the most
E
votes.
que aparece sempre ao lado do presidente.
And he's always appearing publicly at the president's
E
side.
às vezes usando essa camisa, minha cor é a cor do Brasil.
And sometimes he wears a T-shirt that says, "My color is the color of Brazil,"
Negando todas essas lutas, né, da diversidade, negando toda a luta antirracista.
negating thereby all the long anti-racist struggle that preceded.
O resultado dessa concentração de renda
And the result of this concentration of wealth
são esses números da violência.
are the numbers about violence. So this is an atlas of violence in 2019.
Desses números da violência, cabe destacar aí,
What I want to highlight
infelizmente,
here, unfortunately,
né, quando se fala que as vidas negras importam,
when we're talking about Black Lives Matter,
esse é um retrato de que as vidas negras não importam.
this is actually a portrait of how Black lives do not matter,
Importa para algumas pessoas.
or how they're important for some people.
A juventude negra nós estamos vivendo um verdadeiro genocídio da nossa juventude.
We're actually passing through a real genocide of black youth in Brazil.
A maioria dos homicídios são jovens negros.
Most of the people who are killed are black men, young
Yeah.
black men.
Aqui nós temos, vou mostrar aqui, 5 e 6. Né? No número 5 ali, nos últimos 10 anos, o número de homicídios de negros cresceu 30%, mais do que os de não negros, e em 2017 houve uma redução de 0,3% no homicídio de não negros, enquanto das pessoas negras cresceram
So in the
7,2%.
In the last 10 years, the number of black people killed, black men killed, grew by 30% more than the number of non-black people killed. In 2017, there was a reduction of 0.3% in homicide of non-black people, but the number of black people killed grew by 7.2%.
E há também um aumento considerável do feminicídio, que é a morte das mulheres por serem mulheres.
And there is a considerable, notable number or amount of increase in femicide, or the killing of black women in Brazil.
Para vocês terem uma ideia, só na minha cidade, só no estado da Bahia, no último final de semana, perto de Salvador, assim, que é a capital, foram 3 feminicídios no final de semana.
Just last week, for an example, in the city of Salvador, which is the capital of Bahia, my state, 3 black women were killed just this past weekend.
Tem uma política de segurança pública que é mais armas e de combate, de guerra às drogas, que só faz aumentar os corpos negros.
What we
da
have
juventude
is
negra.
an official police policy that concentrates on introducing more weapons and also waging a so-called drug war, and this is acting to increase the number of homicides.
Há um processo de criminalização dos espaços de divertimento, de diversão dessa juventude.
And there's also a policy of criminalizing the spaces where young black people go for leisure or for pleasure activities.
Na semana passada, em São Paulo, foram 9 jovens negros e da periferia que morreram em uma ação desastrosa da polícia de São Paulo.
Just last week, again, in the city of São Paulo, under a police action carried about by the police of São Paulo, there were 9 young black men who were killed in one of these operations carried out by the police.
Você chegar dispersaram a multidão atrás de uma moto, assim, perseguindo 2 pessoas, em um lugar com 5.000 pessoas, você joga bomba de gás lacrimogêneo, você encurralou e as pessoas foram pisoteadas.
So the police were chasing just 2 people, supposedly, but they chased into a crowd of 5,000 people who were there for a leisure time activity, and then they threw a gas bomb into the midst of the 5,000, and then some of the people actually died being run over by people trying to get away from this.
E o governador ainda defende a política de segurança pública, dizendo que vai continuar.
And the governor of that state has defended this policy. He says this is the public safety policy, and he will continue with
É a
it.
mesma política que está presente também no Rio de Janeiro.
And that's the same policy that's followed in the state and the city of Rio de Janeiro.
Então, a forma como tem sido dada essa guerra às drogas só tem gerado, na sua grande maioria, o encarceramento em massa dessa juventude e a morte.
So that this drug war that's being waged now has resulted mainly in 2 things: mass incarceration of black people and the death of many young black people.
Então, essa segunda parte é falar da nossa resistência. Então, é resistir para reexistir.
So I want to talk now in the second part about our resistance to this state of affairs. We start with the slogan, resist in order to re-exist.
Aqui alguns exemplos da marcha.
Some of these are examples of public marches.
Essa que foi em 95, 300 anos de Zumbi dos Palmares.
This is a historic one in 1995. It was the march of Zumbi, the 300th anniversary of Zumbi dos Palmares.
Que é uma grande vitória do movimento negro.
Okay. I'm going to explain a little bit with Zumbi. Palmares is a Maroon community federation, actually. Some call it a republic, that existed for 100 years in the midst of Brazilian slavery, 100 years before the Haitian Revolution, but involved people who had come from the same region as the Haitian Revolution. And it was called Palmares because of the palm trees that were used there, or they grow there. And Zumbi is one of the leaders, so he is now a national hero. So in 1995, for the first time, they staged the marches that made the government have to recognize him as a national hero. So this was a 300-year anniversary of Zumbi. So people came out to protest under the banner of marching to celebrate 300 years of this Maroon Republic of Palmares.
Essa marcha simbolizou uma mudança na relação com o Estado brasileiro.
And that whole march symbolized a change in the relationship between the black population and the Brazilian state.
Em alguns estados brasileiros é feriado, o 20 de novembro, Dia Nacional da Consciência Negra.
In some Brazilian states, they've managed to make it a national holiday, so it's celebrated as a day of national black consciousness.
É um grande exemplo dessa vitória, porque você começou um dia que praticamente não existia, era restrito ao movimento negro, e você transformou isso em uma data nacional.
This is a certain kind of victory which is important to mark. It used to be something that only black movements recognized each year, but we managed to get it recognized as a national holiday in several states and across the country.
Aqui nós temos a Marcha das Mulheres Negras contra o racismo e a violência.
On this side is the march
E pelo
of
bem viver.
women against racism and against violence and for the right to live well.
Aí em novembro de 2015,
That was November 2015.
assim, é um movimento mais que expressivo das mulheres negras.
This is one of the
É um
most
movimento que tem puxado as questões do movimento negro.
This is one of the most expressive and the largest of black movements, and it's a black women's led movement. It is one of the largest expressions of resistance in Brazil.
Então diz que quando a mulher negra se move, né, move o mundo.
As we say, when a black woman moves, then the whole world has to move.
Aqui a manifestação é a partir da morte de Marielle Franco.
This is one of the demonstrations when Marielle Franco was assassinated.
Ela foi eliminada fisicamente,
She was eliminated physically,
né, mas ela se transformou em muitas coisas.
but she's managed to transform herself or be transformed into many things.
Ela virou camisa,
She's
virou
become-
bottom,
Vital?
pino,
She became, of course, something on a pin or a slogan, an emblem.
bandeira,
She became a flag.
movimento.
She became a movement.
Então, dentro do que nós chamamos da espiritualidade, ela saiu do campo físico e agora rompeu com a barreira do tempo e do espaço.
What we say in terms of our spirituality is that she's come out of the physical realm and she's now breaking past the barriers of the physical into the realm of ideas and spirituality.
E não está deixando em paz os seus algozes. Não está deixando em paz aqueles que
And she's not leaving, she's troubling the peace. They don't sleep peacefully, those who killed her,
enquanto a justiça não for feita,
until justice is done in her name.
né? Porque a ideia de eliminá-la era eliminar um movimento.
Because the idea in eliminating her was to eliminate the movement.
Eu me lembro de Steve Biko,
I
da
remember-
morte de Steve Biko
I remember the death of Steve Biko in South
e
Africa
a música de Peter Gabriel,
and the music by Peter Gabriel.
que ele diz: às vezes você pode apagar uma vela, né? Mas quando a floresta está em chama você não consegue, né?
Sometimes you can manage to snuff out a candle, but if the whole forest is raging in fire, you
Então,
can't put
o
that
que
out.
assim não é a floresta propriamente das árvores, que nós não queremos queimar as árvores,
I'm not trying to say that we want trees to be burned,
mas a floresta da insurgência,
but I'm talking about the forest of
da
insurgency,
rebelião,
the
né?
forest of rebellion.
Essa daí reacendeu e as pessoas estão de fato se movimentando.
That has been relit and people are actually moving.
A Marielle conseguiu aumentar a participação das mulheres negras na política.
She, among the other things that Marielle managed to do, is that she managed to increase the number of black women who are now involved in politics,
Na representação política, inclusive no Congresso Nacional.
in political representation, including in the National Congress.
Aí a movimentação também pelo presidente Lula, pela libertação.
This is another movement for the liberation or the freeing of former President Lula.
Esse é um exemplo da politização da justiça
This was an example. His arrest was an example of the politicization of the justice system in Brazil
e a judicialização da política.
and the how do I say this? Politicization of the justice system and justicizing the politics.
No meu
of
entendimento,
Brazil.
não teve um julgamento justo
That he did not have a fair trial.
e é uma disputa política, né, que ele já foi retirado uma vez da disputa
And it was a way to take him out of political running.
e certamente não deverá participar da próxima.
And he did not participate in the last election, and he probably won't be able to
E
participate in
o
the
que nos
next.
leva a entender a profundidade que se dá desses 10, 12 anos, de fato, conhecendo verdadeiramente o que são as elites brasileiras.
And so this helps us to understand how deeply important the last 10 or 12 years were, how much against what went on in those 10 or 12 years are the Brazilian elites.
e setores médios também,
and also some sectors of the middle class.
porque são aqueles que, diante dessa desigualdade que eu apresentei, né, não tinha igualdade material, né, principalmente os setores médios, mas você tem um país onde o salário mínimo é muito baixo, então você não tinha o dinheiro, mas você tinha os serviços.
So for the middle classes, we're talking primarily white middle classes in Brazil, with respect to inequality, they don't necessarily have the money, the material means to primarily money. But what they do have, even if they earn a low salary, is because the salaries of the majority of the people are so very low that they can always claim services. So they have servants, domestic workers, etc. in the white middle class, even if they're not wealthy.
São pessoas que acham normal aqui não ter empregada doméstica aqui nos Estados Unidos.
So these are people who, it's not like in the United States where you'd say it's not normal that everybody has a maid in the house in the United States.
Mas nas suas casas tinham 4, 3 pessoas trabalhando como trabalhadores domésticos.
They would not have that in the United States, but in Brazil, these same people would have 4 or 5 people working in middle class home
Pelo
as
preço de
servants
uma.
because of how cheap it is to get servants.
Então você tinha 4 pelo preço de uma.
So you could get 4, but you were really paying only the price that you would have paid to get 1.
Até 4 anos atrás, a trabalhadora doméstica não havia sido regulamentado o trabalho doméstico.
Up to 4 years ago, there weren't even any national regulations with respect to domestic work.
Era comum você ter a empregada doméstica considerada como alguém da família.
What they said was that the maid in the house was considered a member of the family.
Só que quando a pessoa morria, não recebia herança.
Just that as a member of the family, when the head of the family died, she wasn't going to get anything. There's no legacy for her.
O Brasil deve ter, do ponto de vista da arquitetura, deve ser um dos poucos lugares no mundo, na arquitetura, que tem quarto de empregado em apartamento.
Brazilian national architecture must be one of the few in the world that, as part of the national architecture, there's always a room inside the house that is the maid's room.
Que é muito próximo aos utensílios domésticos, onde se guardam as coisas.
And it's also the room, the maid's room is always right next to the storeroom where you just put junk storage in the apartment or the house.
Aqui é mais alguma das movimentações nossas.
These are some other movements of ours.
Ali, lá no canto, é a Revolta dos Búzios, né?
This is a march commemorating that revolt of the cowrie shells that I spoke about in the 1790s, on the 8th of November.
Que foi a volta desses heróis à Câmara de Vereadores.
So this is taking place near the municipal palace or the municipal, what do you call them in the States?
É como se fosse cortejo de volta.
The mayor's place, the mayor's palace. So this is a march there with the four of the most famous martyrs. So they came out both to protest and to commemorate the 4 martyrs of this slave revolt.
Porque no período colonial era comum você ter a Câmara e embaixo no sótão, no porão, a cadeia.
One of the reasons why it's important to have this march or this protest there is that in the colonial period in Brazil, it was common to have a municipal palace or a government palace, and then in the bottom of it, you would have a prison or a place where slaves were held.
E nós fizemos o caminho de volta.
So we did that march.
E dessa vez eles não ficaram no porão.
We took the 4 martyrs around, but this time they didn't get back in, where they weren't put back into the prison underneath the municipal palace.
E sim no plenário principal da Câmara.
But instead, we put them out into the principal plaza in front of the municipal palace.
Aqui a marcha do empoderamento crespo, que é uma forma que a juventude tem utilizada para se movimentar.
So this one to your right is a distinctive form of organizing a protest movement that particularly young black Brazilian youth have created, and it's called the March of Nappy-Headed Empowerment. Crespo is nappy hair.
E aqui a marcha, que nós temos a marcha de Zumbi dos Palmares, né?
Again, it's the march to celebrate Zumbi of the Palmares, the Maroon Federation.
Então, no 20 de novembro, nós temos 2 marchas na cidade de Salvador.
We have 2 such marches in November, always in Salvador.
É importante dizer que Salvador é uma cidade que tem cerca de 3 milhões de pessoas, quase 3 milhões de pessoas,
It's important to say that Salvador has nearly 3 million people,
e 83% da população é negra.
and 83% of them are black.
But,
However,
né, aqui em frente à Câmara de Vereadores,
this is the municipal palace here in front. You see where the people are holding hands in front.
nós utilizamos uma cerimônia religiosa, né, que é um ebó,
Here we're using an Afro-Brazilian religious ceremony that's called Ebo,
mas aí nós fizemos um ebó coletivo
but we turned it into something we're calling a collective Ebo
para nos posicionar contra o racismo,
to mark our opposition to racism,
o machismo, o sexismo, o feminicídio,
machismo, sexism, racism, machismo,
e todas as formas de opressão.
and all forms of oppression.
Essa manifestação aqui é de um navio que tem uma biblioteca que corre o mundo. Esse aqui. Um navio ship,
Okay.
library ship, like
This is a ship. This is taking place of the side of a ship that has a library that sails around the world.
que antes de sair de um porto, acho que na Europa, ele pediu orações porque eles estavam indo para uma terra onde de espíritos malignos, dominado por pessoas que acreditam em espírito.
So they had asked for some kind of blessing or ceremony before they left the port because they were sailing away to a place that was dominated by malignant spirits.
E aí, de fato, os espíritos apareceram.
And in fact, the spirits did come up.
As pessoas fizeram uma grande manifestação em frente ao porto.
What we did was a big demonstration at the port.
Né? O navio teve que fazer um ajustamento de conduta com o Ministério Público, com a
The,
Justiça.
this ship then was instituted in a case in the public Ministry of Public Safety.
Com um pedido de desculpas.
And they had to apologize for saying that they were sailing to a place of
Teve
evil
que fazer um
spirits.
vídeo falando da diversidade religiosa.
And we used the opportunity to show a video and to talk about religious diversity.
Tudo isso porque teve uma postura intolerante, né, racista, do que a gente chama desse racismo religioso.
Let me explain a little bit. The Afro-Brazilian religions are demonized by conservative sectors in Brazil, and I guess outside Brazil if you don't know it. So part of this is a protest against this kind of religious intolerance, or some people call it religious racism, saying that the Afro-Brazilian religions are demons and primitivism and so forth.
Aqui também mais uma caminhada contra a intolerância religiosa.
Yet another march against religious violence and religious hatred.
Aqui uma forma também dessa juventude de se trazer a cultura à juventude para resistir.
This is another way that that black youth are using their culture as a form of resistance and in resistance activities. This is an art meeting actually in a peripheral neighborhood in Brazil.
Aqui é um exemplo das ações afirmativas,
This is an example of how affirmative action played out.
que foi a primeira turma de graduados em medicina
This was the very first class of black graduates in medicine from the Federal University of the
Isso.
Recôncavo in Bahia.
que é uma universidade que tem 10 anos, essa universidade,
It's a new university, been there for 10
que já
years.
nasceu com ações afirmativas.
And it was actually created to undertake affirmative action.
Então isso fez uma enorme diferença, assim, foi uma imagem que correu, viralizou, né? Essa
This-
juventude negra aí.
This university in its 10 years has managed to have an enormous effect, turn many things around for youth of the type that you see pictured here.
E aqui, deixa eu ver. Aqui é o grande desafio que está posto. Salvador é uma cidade negra, mas que nunca elegeu um prefeito ou uma prefeita negra.
This is one of the greatest challenges that we're facing right now. As I said, Salvador is a heavily black city, which has never had a black mayor.
Né? Então, tem alguns militantes do movimento negro que dizem que Salvador é um Atlanta que não deu certo, que ainda não deu certo.
Atlantic?
Atlanta.
So many people in the black movement are saying that Salvador is sort of like an Atlanta, the city of Atlanta, but it didn't come out right yet.
Hoje nós estamos num enorme desafio,
So now we're facing this great challenge.
porque nós estamos disputando dentro dos partidos políticos
So for the first time, we are within the different political parties saying that we're going to run,
principalmente dentro dos partidos de esquerda,
especially in the left parties.
a indicação de nomes de pessoas negras para disputar a prefeitura de Salvador.
So in all the left parties have been putting forward black candidates for the first time
Tem
to
gerado
run for mayor of Salvador.
Tem gerado um movimento bastante interessante para testar o racismo institucional.
And this has proved to be an interesting test case for institutional racism.
Né? Porque há um discurso de que hoje se reconhece o racismo, mas na hora da prática você volta ao velho entendimento que somos todos iguais.
So there is a new discourse that says we recognize that there's racism in Brazil, but in the hour when it's time, when the rubber hits the road, we go back to the same practices of racial inequality.
Então, o que nós temos cobrado é justamente a coerência dos partidos de esquerda.
So what we've been demanding, particularly of the parties of the left, is a coherence with respect to
O
inequality.
Partido Comunista do Brasil, depois de uma certa resistência, indicou como pré-candidata a deputada estadual Olívia Santana.
So the Communist Party, for example, after a bit of struggle, has put forward the name of a black woman to run as their candidate for mayor.
Eu estou fazendo uma disputa dentro do meu partido, que é o Partido Socialista Brasileiro,
I'm doing something similar inside the Socialist Party, which is my party,
para ser indicado também como pré-candidato,
so that I too come forward as a pre-candidate for
porque
mayor.
o que nós estamos afirmando a todo momento é que nós gostaríamos que a cor não contasse.
Kia?
A cor não fizesse diferença.
What we like to see happen is that that color wouldn't make a difference.
Porque o argumento deles que eles afirmam que a cor não conta,
Because they always say color doesn't matter.
que você não deve decidir a prefeitura com base na cor.
They say that you shouldn't determine who you're going to vote for as mayor on the basis of color.
Então nós estamos construindo um contradiscurso,
So we're trying to construct a counter
que é
narrative.
justamente que nós queremos que a cor não conte,
That's exactly what we want. We want a mayor elected and color shouldn't
porque
count.
ela conta tanto que só faz as pessoas brancas.
So it counts only if you're talking about white people.
Porque na cidade de Salvador, o racismo ele se transmutou na pobreza.
Because in Brazil, actually, or in the city of Salvador, what has happened to poverty is that poverty has transformed itself or is the same as race. Race is poverty.
Salvador é uma cidade extremamente segregada.
And Salvador is a very segregated city as
Você
well.
parece que está todo mundo junto, mas não estamos.
On the surface, it looks like we're all in there together, but that's not true.
Salvador, os 10% mais ricos, quando comparado aos 40% mais pobres, você tem uma distância aí de 34 vezes.
For the top 10% of the wealthy compared to the bottom 40% of the poor, there's a distance of 30 times a difference in their economic holdings, in their income.
Entretanto, a renda dos 10% mais ricos de Salvador é muito semelhante aos 10% mais ricos da cidade de São Paulo.
On the other hand, if you compare the income of the top 10% in Salvador, it's very close to the income of the top 10% in the other city to the south, the major city, São Paulo.
Então, entretanto, o produto interno de Salvador, ou seja, o produto interno bruto de Salvador, é apenas 10% do produto interno bruto de São Paulo, da cidade de São Paulo.
But if you compare the the state product of Salvador with the state product of São Paulo state, it's only 10%. So in other words, whereas Sao Paulo is responsible for a huge amount of the national income that's generated, and Salvador is responsible for a smaller part, the top level wealthy elites have the same amount of economic income.
Isso demonstra o quanto essa renda é concentrada
And that lets you know something about the concentration of wealth
e
in Brazil.
quanto a branquitude conta mais em Salvador do que em São Paulo.
And it also shows how much whiteness counts even more in Salvador than it does in Sao Paulo.
Foi por isso que eu afirmei que Salvador é o paraíso dos brancos.
That's why we say that Salvador is a white man's
É uma Roma
paradise.
negra, mas é o paraíso dos brancos.
It's a black Rome, culturally they say, but it's a paradise for white people.
Eu vou voltar aqui só para passar um
I'm going to show one video.
vídeo. Não podemos caminhar sozinhos. À medida que caminhamos, devemos assumir o compromisso de estarmos juntas e juntos. Em tempos difíceis,
Esse é um vídeo da minha campanha do ano passado, para deputado federal.
E apesar de tempos temerosos, ainda temos sonhos. Seguimos com fé na gente. Serei sua voz, serei sua vez. Sou e serei a fé daqueles e daquelas que
So
acreditam
this
na
is part of
transformação.
his the campaign,
Acredito
and
que o
the slogan
fortalecimento dessa
is
luta
"Fé na
só é
gente." How do I
possível se
translate that?
estivermos de mãos dadas.
Faith in the people, or faith in ourselves, and so a lot of this is directed to black youth, talking about their right to dream, their right to struggle, their right to take the city,
Seus profissionais. Lutamos por igualdade de gênero e racial
and
pra valer.
talking about what they stand for, which is equality, equality of
Negra,
lines of
viva
race,
e orgulhosa.
gender,
Sonhamos e
sexual
lutamos por um
orientation.
Brasil onde a cor, a raça e o gênero
And we're
sejam
dreaming of a
objetos de
certain type of
desigualdade.
Brazil that is
Queremos o Brasil do
anti-racist,
ser,
anti-sexist,
não o Brasil do
anti-homophobic,
ter.
but
Queremos
that
o
Brazil
Brasil
has
do
to be
bem viver.
constructed, it has to be
Somos
built.
gente que se importa com gente. Por isso,
So for us, we are people for whom other people matter. Black lives matter, our lives matter.
Silvio Humberto, deputado federal.
And it's been turned into a song, of course.
Fé na gente, o momento é hoje. Silvio Humberto, deputado federal, 4012.
That actually was a picture from a different campaign, not the current mayor's campaign. A year and a half ago, he ran for state assembly, and he said, "Be sure to tell them I didn't win, but that I came out. The party and our structure for running the campaigns came out much stronger from that experience."
eu gostaria de encerrar esses slides
I want to close my presentation
com uma referência de uma escritora
referring to one of our great black women writers,
que é Conceição Evaristo,
Conceição Evaristo,
que tem a ver com aquela Vidas Negras Importam.
which has a little bit to do with the slogan Black Lives Matter.
E antes, eu gostaria até de que possamos entender que essa nossa travessia, né, que nos fez chegar aqui às Américas,
First, I want to say that the crossing that made us arrive here
eu
in the
estou cada
Americas,
vez mais convencido
with that, I'm more and more convinced
que a nossa dimensão humana sozinha
that our human dimension,
não
just us,
suportaria os horrores do tráfico e não suportaria os horrores da escravidão.
that without the grandness of our humanity, we would not have been able to support, to bear up with, or to survive the horrors of the crossing that brought us here to the Americas.
É preciso considerar a dimensão imaterial,
We have to take into account an immaterial kind of dimension,
que eu poderia aqui denominar da dimensão espiritual,
which I would like to call here a certain spiritual dimension,
que nos ajudou a fazer a travessia do Calunga Grande,
which helped us to cross Kalunga, or the Middle Passage,
né, e sobreviver aos horrores da escravidão.
and to survive the horrors of slavery.
E está possibilitando esse novo momento aqui
And that same thing is making possible this new moment
de conexões entre nós.
of connections among us.
Né? Porque se na época do navio negreiro nós éramos tratados como umas coisas,
So if during the era of the slave trade and the slave ships we were treated as things,
decorrido mais de 400 anos, ainda continuamos sendo tratados como se fôssemos coisas.
400 years later, unfortunately, we're still being treated as if we were things.
Só a ideia de fé, da espiritualidade, pode nos fazer encontrar as saídas.
So I think that spirituality and a certain kind of faith in ourselves can help us to find the way out of this.
Transformando em dor,
Transforming pain
em música, em superação,
we transform that pain that we went through into music and into many other ways of overcoming.
seja no blues, seja no samba,
Whether that music is blues or whether that music is samba,
no rap,
whether it's rap.
né? Essa forma que nós temos assim, extremamente generosa de quem luta por liberdade e não esquecer ninguém.
We have a very generous way. Whenever we wage freedom fights, we don't leave behind anybody.
Então, só faz reafirmar aquilo que eu falei no início,
So that reaffirms for me what I said in the beginning.
né? Referendando o que a ativista do Black Lives Matter da África do Sul said.
When I refer to what the activists from Black Lives Matter in South Africa said to me.
Não foram o que nós não fizemos,
It wasn't what we didn't manage to do,
e sim o que fizemos.
but yes, rather what we did do.
E Conceição Evaristo diz:
And this is the quote from Conceição Evaristo.
eles combinaram de nos matar, mas nós combinamos de não morrer.
They conspired to kill us, but we conspired to not die.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you.
Muito obrigado. Thank you, Professor Jerry.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Can you translate to the?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Actually, your presentation was remembering about the Hong Kong rebellions, and I think all American, all the world watched about young people, the rebellions against the Chinese government, and that really reminded me about how, because the young generation in Hong Kong now, they don't see any hope in the future, and because the house is so expensive, and they cannot live in, they don't see any hope in the future, and they use a very violent, rebellious way to fight the government. So you can see a lot of bloody and very ugly or very violent picture from the news media. And I want to know about when you empower your youth people in Brazil, how did you manage your youth very non-violence to lead these youths against fight by the government and fight inequality? So, what are your suggestions for the people, for the youth people in Hong Kong?
Agradeço a pergunta.
Thank you for the question.
E é importante dizer que assim, o processo é violento.
The process in Brazil is violent. It's not, what's going on is not nonviolent.
A nossa juventude tem morrido.
Our youth have been involved in struggles that are not nonviolent.
Nós temos trabalhado num processo de empoderamento, formação de quadros.
We've been working to empower youth. We have a process for empowering youth and training them as cadres.
Não é algo fácil,
It's not easy,
mas eu acho que ainda estamos numa fase que as nossas mãos ainda estão assim.
we are actually in a beginning phase where our hands are
Abertas.
still open.
E isso nós temos falado de forma muito assim para diversos setores da sociedade.
And we've spoken about this to diverse sectors of the society.
Mas eu aviso principalmente para os pares, né, alguns dos meus pares, que não se importam. Que eu disse, vocês deviam ter cuidado quando a mão fechar.
But I tell some of the people that I work with and some of the people that I associate with, right now our hands are open, but you better watch out because sometimes the hand can then close.
Porque ainda estamos dispostos a fazer pontes.
We are at this moment still disposed to bridging to the others.
Apesar das nossas mortes.
Although we have so many people that have been killed on our side.
Apesar da inversão da ordem natural das coisas.
Despite the unnatural inversion of things.
Porque não é normal pai, mãe, avô e avó enterrar neto e enterrar seus filhos.
Because we're living through a situation which is very unnatural. We have mothers, fathers, grandmothers and grandfathers who are burying their children.
Há uma inversão brutal do ciclo da vida.
That's a very brutal inversion of the cycle of life.
Então, hoje nós estamos vivendo o velho racismo com um novo racismo.
So today what we're going through in Brazil is the old racism and at the same time a new racism.
Porque nos eliminar fisicamente faz parte da velha forma como o racismo sempre se estruturou.
So the old part is the same as it's always been. Eliminate us physically. That's always been part of the racial structure in Brazil.
E o outro, esse novo racismo, são as pessoas negras fora de lugar.
And the new racism is to deal with black people who are considered out of place.
Exemplo disso é ocupar a universidade.
So for example, black people coming into the university is considered them being out of place.
Então, hoje você tem uma movimentação que está nas ruas.
So right now we have a movement that is out in the streets.
Eu não sei, assim, precisar o que é que vai acontecer no meu país.
I'm not capable of
Quando?
saying right now. I don't know how to say what will happen, how it's going to turn out in my country.
Vai ter as suas especificidades,
It will have its own specificities.
mas é importante que se diga que as pessoas não estão paradas.
But I think the most important thing to point out is that people are not paralyzed, they're not stopping.
Porque se a gente comparar com o que aconteceu no Chile,
So if you wanted to compare, for example, with what's happening in Chile or Chile?
Chile,
In Chile,
né? Não foram 30 centavos.
it wasn't the 30 cents.
Alguém disse foram 30 anos de desigualdade.
Some people said it was 30 years of inequality,
E que
not
naquele
the 30
momento
cents.
explodiu.
And then all of a sudden it exploded.
Então, assim, nós estamos é um processo.
So it's a process.
Eu tenho por característica não sou uma pessoa que defenda a violência.
I'm not a person who defends violence.
Eu defendo o diálogo, mesmo com aqueles que insistem em não querer dialogar.
I defend dialogue, even with people who insist that they don't want dialogue.
Entendo que a cultura tem um papel importantíssimo
I understand that culture has an important role to play
para levar uma aproximação com as pessoas, para juntar as pessoas,
to bring people together,
porque o racismo você perde muita energia.
because you lose a lot of energy fighting,
Eu sou,
dealing with racism.
eu sou professor da área de desenvolvimento econômico,
I'm a
socioeconômico,
professor in socioeconomic development,
e digo, desenvolver é você potencializar as pessoas.
and what I say is development is for you to make it possible that people can fulfill their own potential.
E tento conversar com aqueles esclarecidos,
And I try to talk with the few people who are enlightened,
o quanto um país como o Brasil, que tem uma diversidade enorme,
how a country like Brazil has an enormous diversity,
tem perdido oportunidades.
and how much with that kind of enormous diversity it has squandered opportunities.
Em nome de um padrão que tem como característica principal excluir as pessoas.
Because it's been operating to a standard that has as its main point to exclude
Então,
the
nós
majority
estamos
of people.
olhando essas diversas manifestações.
So we're orienting some of these different types of demonstrations, marches.
Mais cedo ou mais tarde, esses ventos chegarão na nação chamada Brasil. Mais cedo ou mais tarde, os ventos chegarão.
This is paradoxical, so I'm trying to translate it as a paradox. But sooner or later, the winds may arrive in Brazil.
Sorry. Thank you again for the presentation. I had a question mainly about the connection between previous Black Power movements in Brazil and the current movement in Brazil, and what the sort of relationship is. Oftentimes we hear about the influence from quilombos and that period, but we don't hear about the multiple movements in between. And I know in the U.S. we have a long connection between Garveyism into Black Power into current movements as well. Thank you.
Assim, para não ser anacrônico, né, que a gente vai falar assim, do movimento negro, né, no século, assim, desde que nós pisamos no Brasil, assim, você pode pegar várias revoltas.
So I don't want to speak anachronistically, but you could start with many revolts.
Né, nós temos a revolta dos Búzios que eu citei
So we
aqui,
have the Cowrie Shell revolt that I talked about.
a revolta dos Malês,
We have something called the revolt of the Malays, where people who are Muslim coming from Mali in that area, West Africa.
recente o professor João Reis lançou um livro, A Greve Negra, de 1857.
Recently, there's a history book by Professor João Reis which talks about a strike which took place in 1857.
Né. Agora, nós temos uma organização chamada SPD, Sociedade Protetora dos Desvalidos,
desvalidos. We also have something called, this is a vast history, so I'm just doing some points, Society for the Protection of People who are, we would say, disabled, differently abled,
que foi fundada em 1832
which was founded in 1832
e existe até hoje.
and is still existing today.
Alguns dizem que é o primeiro exemplo de previdência privada no
Some
Brasil.
people say it's the first example of social security in Brazil.
Então você tem as irmandades,
You have the brotherhoods and sisterhoods,
né, que se mantêm.
which are connected to the Catholic Church, but they're black brotherhoods,
Agora,
black sisterhoods, which continue till today.
É importante dizer que você teve tantos movimentos coletivos como também as pessoas individualmente.
And it's important to say that we had as many collective movements as we had individuals who also waged struggle more individually.
Nem todos foram zumbi,
Not everybody was a zumbi.
mas aqueles anônimos e anônimas
There are some anonymous people
contribuíram de forma decisiva
who contributed decisively
para o fim da escravidão.
to the end of slavery itself.
O que nós falamos, né, é que o nosso problema nunca foi o 13 de maio, e sim o dia 14. É o dia seguinte, day after.
So what we say is it's not important the day that a formal abolition took place on the 13th of May. What's actually important is all that happened from the 14th of May onward,
Que não chegou até o seu final.
which hasn't ended yet.
Assim como lhes prometeram 49
Just as 40 acres and a mule were promised here,
e vocês não receberam,
and you didn't get them,
então nós estamos juntos com vocês para fazer esse processo de reparação.
we also are in the same process of getting reparations.
Assim, posteriormente, nós tivemos a Frente Negra,
So one of the other movements that we had after this period was called the Black Front,
nos,
Frente Negra,
nos anos 30 do século XX,
in the 1930s.
né, que sofreu a influência, assim, que foi quando foi se transformar em um partido, foi dissolvida pela ditadura de Getúlio Vargas.
And what happened was just when the Black Front was getting ready to transform itself into a party, the dictatorship of the several military dictatorships in the 20th century, but the one of Getúlio Vargas is the one that repressed and shut down the Black Front, just as it was getting ready to turn itself into a party.
Nós também temos o Teatro Experimental do Negro,
We also have something called the Black Experimental Theater, which
com a
is
grande
Boy
referência
Theater,
que é Abdias Nascimento.
founded by Abdias de Nascimento.
Né? Então, assim, você tem todo um processo, né, de luta do movimento negro com avanços e recuos.
So what we have is a long process of black struggles or black movements, which have had some successes and some setbacks along the years.
Agora, eu considero que é fundamental isso que nós estamos fazendo aqui,
What I think is fundamental is what we're doing here,
buscando ser protagonistas das nossas conversas.
that we are becoming at last the protagonists or the subjects of our own conversations.
Porque justamente o que eles não queriam é que pudéssemos fazer isso aqui.
And that's exactly what they didn't want to happen, for us to be able to do what we're doing here today.
O movimento negro brasileiro
The black movement in Brazil
teve um papel importante também, por exemplo, no processo de libertação da África do Sul.
For example, the black movement in Brazil played an important role in the anti-apartheid
Nós-
struggle in South Africa.
Popularizamos a libertação de Mandela, colocando na boca das pessoas mais simples.
We managed to transform the slogan or the cry to free Mandela into something that was very common, ordinary people in the street in Brazil.
Por meio da música.
And we did it by means of music.
É comum na minha cidade, nos chamados blocos afros,
In my city, we have something called Afro blocks. So they would be samba schools or agglomerations, but they are black conscious samba schools.
o hino da África do Sul.
And one of them uses, as we play all the time in all of them, the South African national anthem. This was before 1994.
Kososikele África. Né? Então, temos estrada.
So we have a history there.
Thank you. My first question is, how can Black Lives Matter activists in this country help support you all? Like, what kind of support do you all need that activists on the ground can do? And then also, because we're starting to see a more uptick in Black Lives Matter activists who are running for office and actually winning those on every level of government, how can we? What support do you envision those elected officials who are from the Black Lives Movement do to help support? And yeah, that was my question. Yeah, those two. What can activists on the ground do, and then Black Lives Matter activists who are in office do?
É uma ótima pergunta,
That's an optimal, wonderful question.
né, porque isso até já justifica mais de 9 horas, né, de estar aqui hoje, né?
It justifies the 9 hours that I've spent all day here
Porque
today.
eu vim com esse desejo de fazer conexões.
Because that was one of the main desires, one of the main reasons why I came.
Right.
I have a desire to make connections.
Né? Lá, quando eu saí 2 semanas antes, houve uma primeira reunião da Coalizão Negra, incluindo membros do Black Lives Matter.
When I left a couple of weeks, just before I left, a couple of weeks ago, we had one of the first coalition meetings of people from Black Lives Matter in Brazil.
Porque o que nós percebemos, você está dentro de um fenômeno global.
Because we understand that this has become a global phenomenon.
Então nós temos que agir globalmente também,
So we have to act globally as well.
buscando os nossos pontos de interseção.
We want to try to find points of intersection.
Pode ser um processo aí de renovação, de redefinição do que foi o panafricanismo.
Maybe it turns into a reconfiguration or a new configuration of what was once Pan-Africanism.
E aí nós temos que usar o espaço virtual que nós temos,
We have to be able to use the virtual spaces or the digital spaces that
Uma
are at
v-
our disposal.
uma vez que as distâncias diminuíram.
So the distances are now smaller because of the technology.
Isso vai fortalecer as nossas conexões.
That will help us make some stronger connections.
Do ponto de vista político,
From the political standpoint,
eu acho que essas experiências de como vocês chegaram também,
I think that the experiences of how you arrived where you are, how you got to it,
a gente precisa dar continuidade.
we need to be able to give a kind of a continuity to that experience.
E também eu vejo hoje, dentro do ponto de vista econômico,
And also within the economic realm,
cobrar das empresas que têm uma postura aqui nos Estados Unidos e fora dos Estados Unidos tem outra.
we have to begin to press for accountability of, for example, U.S. enterprises that have one posture about things in the United States, and then when they operate outside the United States, for example, in Brazil, they have another policy or another posture.
Um exemplo é o programa de diversidade.
For example, diversity.
Aqui tem uma postura, no Brasil assume o padrão branco.
Here, those companies or those enterprises take on a posture of we're for diversity, but when they get to Brazil, they become all white.
E um outro caminho que nós podemos fazer é incentivar o intercâmbio cultural entre as juventudes.
Another thing that we need to do is encourage or motivate more exchange among the youth.
It's important to not only learn English, but learning Português too.
Yeah.
Né? Então a gente precisa fazer essas make the connections. Na primeira vez que a professora Geri me trouxe aqui,
This-
eu vou falar em
É a
português.
segunda vez.
Não, mas durante a primeira.
Okay, so the first time that he came here, he says, I brought him
Eu disse para ela, eu vou falar com a minha segunda língua,
here.
português,
I'm going to speak in my second language, which is Portuguese, he said.
porque a primeira nós perdemos.
Because the first language, I lost it. We lost our first language.
Então a gente vai ter que encontrar essa língua, né, que vai ser uma língua pan-africana,
So we're going to have to find a language that serves as a kind of Pan-African language, or at least us be able to talk
sem
to each other,
estabelecer hierarquias entre nós,
without establishing hierarchies between us.
porque às vezes vem a hierarquia do inglês.
Because sometimes English appears as a
Então,
hierarchy or as a
então às
hegemonic
vezes a gente
language.
precisa equilibrar isso melhor,
So we may have to balance that out a little bit better.
mesmo porque o mundo está indo para a China.
Especially since most of the world is actually speaking Chinese now anyway.
E ninguém sabe o que vai acontecer.
English is
É um outro
descending
mundo.
on how many people speak it. That's another world. That's a different world.
Mas eu sempre digo que a China é a volta ao primeiro mundo.
So Chinese is actually the first language now in the world.
Tá. É isso. Obrigado a vocês.
Thank you. I thank you.
Great. Well, I want to thank Dr. Silvio and Dr. Jury for being here today and for sharing about your work. Will you please join me in thanking them?
Thank you.
We will end the day with some closing remarks by Professor Bogues, followed by a reception at CSSJ.
Thank you. Really, thank you. Thank you both. I'll be very brief. This has been for us at the CSSJ, a very rich workshop. Part of the objectives of this workshop / conference was to discuss and illustrate and practice ways in which we can think about the pluralities of black life. That there's not one black life, not one black experience, but that there's a plurality of black experiences that are, if you wish, tethered together through a set of common histories and a set of common problems that we have as we all cross the Atlantic. It is absolutely true, I think, that to think of black life today is to think of death. It's to think of the ways in which death and a kind of catastrophe shapes that kind of life, whether you are a refugee or whether you are a young person, young man and young woman in a favela, or living somewhere in the United States, or living in the inner cities of Kingston, Jamaica. But I think the note that we ended on, which is that they tried to kill us, but we did not die, is extremely important. It is not about a certain kind of optimism. It is actually about expressing a certain desire for a certain kind of life. That kind of life which has been made impossible under racial slavery, colonialism, and what some of us would understand as neoliberalism, late capitalism. To think about not dying is also to think about the work of the imagination. Because I would suggest that for black life, not to die and to live has always relied upon a black imagination. Not just the creation of music of Afro-Caribbean or Afro-American, Afro-Brazilian religious forms, but also, quite frankly, political ideas. A search all the time for new ways of common association. A search all the time of thinking about new life forms, of trying to understand what really freedom is about. Not as a kind of normative ideal, but as a set of practices about making the world more human. And in thinking through that and not dying, then also we have to think through a certain kind of ecology. That is, what is our relationship to the world that we're all on? This little boat that is called the planet Earth. And the ways in which that Earth or the planet is being destroyed. A destruction that begins with the plantations, that begins with the actual racial slavery and colonial project of Europe 500 years ago. And that today, to save the planet, quote unquote, is not about the technical things of CO2 or whatever it is that people want to have, as important as those are. But actually to think about the planet differently is to think about us as human beings and what is our relationship to the planet, and to know that we are no longer masters of it, but that we have to find a way to work with what is the natural world to create a more habitable place which can be sustained for all of us in this period. And so for us, I think, to think about from black lives, from slave ships to black lives, then we also have to think about how you cross the River Jordan. What happens when you think about Black Lives Matter today? And after thinking about Black Lives Matter, thinking about crossing the River Jordan. And to cross the River Jordan to get to what? To get to somewhere else. To get to somewhere different. To get to somewhere where we can all be human beings on this planet. And at the heart of that is a form that black people have always struggled from the very first time they came here in the 14 and 1500s. The heart of that is a question about being a human, being a certain kind of equality that is a radical form of equality, not the equality of procedure of politics, but a certain kind of radical equality, but a radical equality in which we embrace one another, not an other, in forms of recognition, but a one another, to treat each other as an other rather than an other, to begin to, if you wish, build a more humane place and a much more just and humane world that we all want. So for us, for slave ships to Black Lives, is about what next. And what next for us is crossing the River Jordan to that different place, which is a more humane place on which black people have always wanted to be since we first came over here, and which we also want to do, not just for ourselves, but actually indeed for the world that we live in. So thank you all very much for coming. Please walk over to the Center for the Study of Slavery and Justice, where we will have a reception where we can just kind of quietly talk to each other, make new friends, as I said, and keep in mind that really la luta continua. The struggle will continue all the time for this more humane place for us and for all the people in the world. Thank you very much.